He promised them salvation, a new world, a better way of living, free from the pains and disappointments of ordinary life. He spoke of a higher purpose, a special destiny reserved only for the chosen few who were brave enough to follow him. To an outsider, his words might have sounded delusional, perhaps even insane, but to those who listened, to those who were searching for meaning in a world that felt meaningless, his promises were like a beacon in the darkest of nights. They were a lifeline, a reason to believe when all other hope seemed lost. These were not fools or simpletons. They were people just like you and me. They came from all walks of life: teachers, students, mechanics, nurses. They were parents, children, brothers, sisters. Each one carried their own private burdens, their own secret sorrows. They were looking for answers, for community, for a sense of belonging that had eluded them. The leader saw their vulnerability. He understood their deepest desires for connection and significance. He offered them a family, a community where they would be accepted without question, loved without condition. All they had to do was trust him. All they had to do was believe in his vision for a perfect world. But this promise of salvation came at a terrible price. It was a deal with the devil disguised as a divine covenant. The path to enlightenment, he claimed, required absolute devotion. It demanded the surrender of their old lives, their past identities, and their critical thinking. Doubts were cast as weaknesses, questions as a sign of betrayal. The outside world was painted as a corrupt, dangerous place. Slowly, invisibly, the walls began to close in around them, isolating them from friends, family, and the very reality they once knew. He delivered only death. That is the chilling truth at the heart of this story. The beautiful dream he wove turned into a horrific nightmare. The promise of eternal life led directly to a violent end. How does this happen? How does a single individual gain such absolute power over the minds and souls of others? How can the human need for belief be twisted into a weapon so deadly that it convinces ordinary people to commit the most unspeakable acts, even against themselves? The leader was a master of manipulation. He didn't use physical chains to bind his followers. He used psychological ones, far stronger and more difficult to break. He understood the intricate workings of the human mind. He knew which buttons to push. He knew which fears to exploit. He knew which desires to feed. His charm was his greatest weapon, a disarming and magnetic force that drew people into his orbit. He could make anyone feel like they were the most important person in the world, seen and understood for the very first time. This initial feeling of validation was incredibly powerful. He used a technique often called love bombing. Newcomers were showered with affection, praise, attention. Once this dependency was established, the leader could begin to slowly withdraw that affection, using it as a tool to reward obedience and punish dissent. Isolation was another key tactic. Followers were systematically cut off from their lives outside the group. They were often convinced to quit their jobs, sell their homes, and donate all their assets to the community. This increased their financial dependence on the leader and removed any practical means of escape. Trapped physically and emotionally, their world shrank until the cult was all that remained, its reality becoming the only reality. Fear, was the final lock on their psychological prison. The leader manufactured an US versus them mentality. He convinced his followers that the outside world was hostile. He created an atmosphere of paranoia where enemies were seen everywhere. He also instilled a deep fear of leaving the group, warning of terrible spiritual consequences and physical consequences for those who dared to abandon the path. This constant state of fear kept followers compliant and dependent, too afraid to question the leader's authority or even consider the possibility of a life outside the cult's suffocating embrace. The atmosphere in Eden's Gate grew heavier, charged with a new and terrifying energy. He began to speak less of building a new world and more of ending the old one. His sermons, once filled with promises of light, now fixated on a final apocalyptic event. He called it the Great Cleansing, a necessary and holy act that would purify the earth and allow the family to ascend to a higher plane. Thorn claimed to receive new visions, more urgent and more violent than before. He described a world consumed by fire and plague. He told his followers that the hostile forces they had long feared were finally closing in. He said government agents were preparing to raid their sanctuary. He framed this final act not as an ending, but as a glorious transformation. Death, he explained, was merely a doorway. The shift from abstract prophecy to concrete planning was chillingly swift. Thorn gathered his most trusted lieutenants. He was giving direct, unambiguous orders. A pivotal moment arrived when a small group of members attempted to flee. Their escape was short-lived. This event was the point of no return for those who remained. On the designated evening, an unusual calm settled over Eden's Gate. Thorn announced it was time for a celebration. Thorn presided like a benevolent father, and his voice seemed calm, soothing, almost hypnotic. He spoke of courage, their sacrifice, the unbreakable bond they all shared. The sacred elixir was brought out. Thorn explained it wasn't poison, but a divine potion to put bodies to sleep so spirits could awaken together. He instructed parents to give the potion to their children first. This was his most cruel, calculated move. He knew once parents acted, their will to live would be extinguished. One by one, cups were filled. The end did not come with a scream, but with a horrifying quiet. When the outside world finally breached the walls, they found no armed resistance. They were met with an appalling reverent silence. Bodies lay arranged in peaceful, almost staged positions. It looked like a congregation fallen asleep mid-service. The scene showed no signs of struggle. Silas Thorn was found in his quarters. He too had taken the potion. He had followed his prophecy to its ghastly end. He promised salvation and a new world, and delivered a silent, empty Eden. The crime was complete. Not everyone drank the elixir. In the final chaotic hours, a handful of individuals found the strength to break free. Driven by primal, instinctual terror, she ran blindly into the dark woods surrounding the compound. Another survivor, Brother Gabriel. His role gave him pockets of isolation. On the final night, he should have been in the hall, but a feigned mechanical issue kept him away. He sabotaged the main vehicle. He grabbed a few hoarded supplies. He slipped away under cover of darkness. For the survivors, escaping Eden's Gate was not a return to freedom, but an entry into a different kind of prison. The world they came back to felt alien and terrifying. simple everyday interactions were fraught with suspicion. They struggled with a complete loss of identity. Who am I now? Even deciding what to eat for breakfast could be paralyzing. The social stigma was a heavy burden. They faced judgment from strangers, and sometimes from their own families. Therapy with counselors who specialize in cult recovery was essential. Naming the abuse was the first act of reclaiming their own minds. Reconnecting with estranged family was a delicate, painful process. For others, unconditional love became their lifeline. Some survivors found healing in advocacy, and others found solace in grounding activities, gardening, art, music. Recovery wasn't erasing the past, but integrating it into a new, stronger identity, chosen day by day to reclaim their right to a life of their own. The tragedy of Aiden's Gate is not an isolated event confined to the past. The shadow of groups like the Family of the New Dawn lingers in the modern world. The internet has become a powerful new ground for recruitment. Algorithms can create digital echo chambers that isolates them as effectively as any remote compound. Modern-day cults may be political movements, or wellness groups, or online communities, yet they use the same playbook of psychological control. The path into delusion is paved with small, seemingly reasonable steps. No one joins a cult, they join a group of like-minded friends. The psychological tools that Thorne used, love bombing, isolation, induced dependency, and fear, are extreme versions of social dynamics in many parts of life. Understanding this anatomy of deception isn't about judging victims, it's about arming ourselves to recognize the subtle warning signs. In the end, the story forces us to look away from the monstrous figure of Silas Thorne and turn the gaze back upon ourselves. Is there a part of me that could have fallen for it? To answer this with a quick and certain no is to deny the power of our own fundamental human needs for connection, for meaning, and for hope. The tragedy is not that the followers wanted these things. The tragedy is that a master manipulator twisted these beautiful human desires into instruments of control and death. So, as we walk away from the chilling silence of Eden's Gate, the question lingers. Would you recognize a cult if you saw one? Could you resist the pull of a loving community if you were at your lowest point? Are you certain that your own need to believe could never be used against you? The chilling truth behind cult killers is not just about a monster like Silas Thorne. It is about the potential for delusion that exists within the human heart. It is a story about them that is, in the end, a profound and disturbing warning for us all.